So here we are back downstairs out on the parking lot, and a really interesting thing about our parking lot that you may not notice if you're just walking through is that you see all these little cracks between the pavement. So it's not just a solid concrete slab or asphalt slab. It's actually paved with permeable pavers, and that's really important for water. So water can make its way through all the cracks in the permeable pavers, which I mentioned a little bit earlier. And instead of overwhelming stormwater systems, it just gradually percolates down into the water table and makes its way back into the water system and the water cycle. Whereas if this was a completely paved surface, it would all come rushing in once we had a big water storm event, go into stormwater systems and overwhelm them. In a really worst case scenario where the stormwater system and the wastewater system are combined, like some parts of Seattle, you actually have wastewater making its way into the stormwater when you have really big flood events. So having permeable pavers and permeable surfaces in general, like the living roof, can really cut down on flooding and runoff and erosion, those kinds of things. So permeable pavers. Also, a great way that we manage water on site here is through our bio swales and rain gardens. So if you take a look over here along this kind of low-lying area behind the parking lot, that's a bio swale, and it's planted with water-loving plants and things that can kind of take up any toxins that make their way into the runoff from the parking lot. You can really see with the light here all the breaks in between the permeable pavers, but it can take up, oils or things that come off of people's cars and actually turn those into biomass. So even things like heavy metals, these plants can take up into their biomass and pull out of the water, so kind of purifying the water in the process. And then we also have what's called a rain garden. So if you keep following me around, you look behind me here to that kind of bushy area back here, that's just almost a bigger like pond type area. It's planted with rushes and sedges and other water loving plants that do the same thing as the plants in the bioswale, but there's just more of them and it's more concentrated. And then you might notice like a low hum sound happening in the background. I don't know if you can hear it on the video or not, but we actually have all of our wastewater treated on site, so we have no city sewer connection. So I'm going to bring you around 360 here, and you'll see some tanks at the top of the hillside here. So buried within this hillside is our wastewater treatment system, and there's a cool picture of it here on the sign. Let me bring you a little bit forward, and then you can maybe see what this hillside used to look like before the tanks were buried. There's a little picture of it. Get you back down. So yeah, it's all a biological process, and bacteria do all the work for us. So all of the gray water from the building, everything from the kitchen sinks, the shower, all of that stuff makes its way into our gray water treatment system, and also from our composting toilets, which I'll talk about right after this. All makes its way into the gray water system, and it gets treated by bacteria. So there's an anaerobic stage where there's no oxygen and the water's just sitting in a tank, and then there's an aerobic stage, and that's what that hum you're hearing is. There's actually blowers pumping oxygen into the water, and bacteria that thrive in an oxygen-rich environment do the cleaning stage there. And then from there the water gets, through gravity, kind of gets fed out to our Glendon Bio Filters, which are basically an above ground drain field in a sense. And they're basically a concrete box that's filled with sand, and then there's grasses and sand kind of piled up around them, grasses growing on top. So it just looks like kind of grassy mounds. But the water gradually makes its way up through the sand and percolates out into the water table on the farm. So in a passive way, we're sending the water, all the water that gets used in the building, back out to the farm and to the local water table to be used, or taken up by plants. This is a nice view of the building. You can see the solar panels, and you've got to get a sense of the way that the water flows. So off from the green roof, down through our gutters, and into the hillside, into the bio swales, and then out towards a wetland restoration project that's just between the farm and the building here. And then our wastewater system also sends water out in the same direction. So being really conscious of how you use water can really reduce your impact. And that way that water kind of naturally flows with gravity is another way that we're sort of mimicking natural processes and reducing our impact. So not as much pumping is required for our wastewater system, for example.